We didn't notice her at first, not because she was hiding, but because she had learned how to stay still when a storm kept circling. Avery Langston's story isn't loud. It's the kind that settles in after the noise dies down, when what's left is fatigue and a quiet refusal to disappear. Here's where she begins. I remember the sound of the envelope before I remember the words. Paper sliding against paper, the weight of it on my kitchen counter. My name typed cleanly across the front, like nothing inside could hurt me. 18 months. My attorney told me over the phone. His voice was careful. The way people sound when they already know the damage. That's how long this could take. I leaned against the counter and closed my eyes. She's still doing this. She filed again this morning. My mother didn't call me her daughter in the complaint. She called me a manipulator. She said I isolated my grandmother. She said I took advantage of a woman who didn't know what she was signing. I laughed once, sharp and short, then stopped. She knows exactly what she's doing. She's contesting the will. He continued. She's asking the court to declare your grandmother lacked testamentary capacity. I looked at the envelope again. My hands were steady. That surprised me. We'll respond, I said. I'm not backing down. There was a pause on the line. I didn't expect you would. What we noticed then was the way Avery didn't raise her voice. Not once. I hung up and slid the envelope into a drawer I kept empty on purpose. I stood there longer than I needed to. 18 months already behind me, and more ahead. If you're still listening, stay with me. This doesn't start with a victory. It starts with endurance. By the time the plane touched down in New York, my phone said it was early afternoon, but my body was still on West Coast time. I hadn't slept. I'd stared at the seat in front of me and counted breaths while the cabin lights flicked on and off. At the rental counter, the clerk glanced at my face and paused. Long trip. Yeah, that was all I had. White Plains Medical Center smelled like disinfectant and burned coffee. I followed the signs, my shoes squeaking too loudly on the floor. When I reached the nurse's station, my mother was already there. Perfect hair, structured coat, clipboard in her hand like it belonged to her. She didn't look at me at first. I'm here to see my grandmother, I told the nurse. My mother turned then. Her eyes moved over me, slow and assessing, like she was deciding whether I belonged in the room. She's resting. I just flew in. That was your choice. The nurse hesitated. Are you immediate family before I could answer? My mother stepped in. No. The word landed hard, flat, finished. I felt heat climb up my neck. She raised me. My mother's mouth tightened. That doesn't make you immediate family. The nurse shifted her weight. Uncomfortable. Visiting hours. She needs quiet. My mother cut in, and privacy. I stood there, my bag still on my shoulder, feeling suddenly out of place in a building full of people who belonged somewhere. I just want a minute. My mother lowered her voice, sharp enough to sting. You always want a minute, and then you want more. I didn't trust myself to respond. My hands were shaking, and I tucked them into my coat pockets. Doctor needs to speak with me, my mother added, already turning away. About her capacity. Capacity. The word echoed as she walked down the hall. I stayed where I was until the nurse offered a small, apologetic look and went back to her screen. When the elevator doors closed at the end of the corridor, I finally moved, not toward my grandmother's room, toward the empty chairs by the window. I sat, waited, and tried to breathe like I wasn't already being erased. I didn't plan it. I just watched the hallway until my mother disappeared into the elevator, then moved before I could talk myself out of it. My grandmother's room was dim, curtains half closed. Machines hummed softly, steady and patient. She looked smaller than I remembered, skin pale against the white sheets. When her eyes opened and found me, something eased in my chest. Avery, she whispered. The name came out thin but sure. I'm here. I took her hand. It felt dry, lighter than it should have. I came as fast as I could. She squeezed once, weak, but deliberate. I know. I leaned closer so she wouldn't have to strain. Her breathing was uneven, each rise of her chest taking effort. She studied my face like she was trying to memorize it. "Don't listen to what's said out loud," she murmured. "That's never where the truth is." I nodded, even though I didn't understand. "Look for what was moved on purpose." She paused, catching her breath. "First isn't first." My throat tightened. "Okay." Her fingers curled again. "Urgent now. And don't let Monica touch the blue key." "The blue key," I repeated. "Quiet." She watched me for a long second, checking something. Then her grip loosened. "You've always paid attention," she said. "That's why this has to be you." Footsteps sounded in the hall. Voices. My grandmother's eyes drifted closed, like she'd already said everything she could. I stayed there a moment longer, holding her hand, letting the sound of the machines fill the space between us. When I finally stepped back into the hallway, the words followed me. First isn't first. The blue key. I didn't know what they meant yet, but I knew they mattered. The reading took place a week later in a conference room that smelled faintly of old paper and lemon cleaner. I arrived early and sat with my hands folded, staring at the grain in the table. My mother walked in 10 minutes late, heels clicking, coat still on. She nodded once, like we were strangers sharing an elevator. Noah cleared his throat and began. His voice stayed even, practiced. "Judith Langston, being of sound mind." My mother leaned forward before he finished the sentence. Her fingers tapped the table, quick and impatient. The room went still as he continued. The estate, the house in Westchester, the accounts, all to me. My mother's breath caught, sharp. "That's not right." Noah didn't look up. "To my daughter, Monica Langston Hale. I leave the sum of $1. The chair scraped loudly as she stood. "Absolutely not." Her face flushed, the careful calm cracking. "This is fraud." I felt the heat rise in my chest but didn't move. My pulse was loud in my ears. She didn't know what she was signing. My mother pressed on. "You know that." Noah met her eyes. "Your mother was evaluated. Multiple times." She laughed, short and bitter. "By doctors she paid." Her gaze snapped to me. "What did you tell her when no one was around?" I kept my voice low. "Nothing you didn't already say yourself." She shook her head. "Hair coming loose. You manipulated her. You isolated her. You took advantage." The words hung there, heavy. "I'm contesting this," she added, already reaching for her bag. "I'll make sure everyone knows exactly what you are." The door closed behind her harder than necessary. Noah gathered his papers slowly. "This will get ugly." I nodded. My hands were still steady. That surprised me more than anything. The email from work arrived on a Tuesday morning. Subject line neutral enough to pass as routine. I opened it standing in my kitchen, coffee cooling untouched. "Can you come in today?" Janet asked when I called. Her voice sounded tight, like she was bracing. The conference room felt smaller than usual. Janet sat with someone from Human Resources I didn't recognize. A manila folder rested between them. "We received a formal complaint," the HR woman began, fingers folded, along with court filings. Janet wouldn't meet my eyes. "They're concerned about reputational risk." I nodded slowly. "My mother sent it." The HR woman didn't correct me. "There are allegations of psychological manipulation of an elderly individual." I let out a breath through my nose. "That's not true. We're not making a determination," Janet added quickly, "but pending review. We're placing you on administrative leave." A pause. Then the rest, delivered carefully. "Your position will be eliminated." I packed my desk that afternoon. A mug. A notebook. The plant I forgot to water half the time. Co-workers avoided eye contact, offering small smiles that didn't quite land. At home. The phone buzzed with messages I didn't answer. I sat on the floor, back against the couch, and listened to the apartment settle around me. My mother didn't call. She didn't have to. The house was quiet in a way that felt staged, like it was waiting to be disturbed. I moved through it slowly, touching familiar things without really seeing them. The library door stuck the way it always had. I pushed harder than necessary and stepped inside. My grandmother's voice stayed with me. First isn't first. I stood in front of the shelves, scanning spines I'd seen my whole life. Philosophy, history, old leather, cracked at the corners. On the third shelf, wedged between two thicker volumes, sat First Principles. The title looked almost out of place, like it had been dropped there instead of shelved. I pulled it. The sound was soft. A click I felt more than heard. The shelf shifted under my hand, then swung inward, slow and deliberate. Cold air brushed my face. I didn't move right away. Behind it was a narrow room. Dust settled thick along the floor. A desk, filing cabinets. A metal box centered like it had been placed for someone specific. On top sat a small blue USB drive. So that's the blue key, I muttered. I picked it up, heavier than it looked. The metal box creaked open when I lifted the lid. Inside were folders, neatly labeled by year. Bank statements, legal documents, everything dated, everything precise. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Noah's name lit the screen. I think I found something. I told him once the call connected. A pause. Then, quieter. How big enough to explain everything? I slid the drive into the laptop on the desk. The screen lit up. File names filled the display. Video after video. I closed the laptop without opening one. Not yet. I needed to breathe first. A knock came just after dusk. Not loud. Careful. I checked the peephole before opening the door. My Aunt Lillian stood there with her coat still on, hands clasped like she might bolt. She stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. "I can't stay long," she said. Her eyes moved around the room, avoiding mine. "Your mother thinks you're unraveling." I closed the door slowly. "She's been saying that for years." Lillian swallowed. "She's pushing for mediation. Fast. She's telling people you'll fold once the pressure's on." I leaned against the counter. "Why are you telling me this?" Her shoulders sagged, because I should have said something sooner. She pulled an envelope from her bag and held it between us. Old. Worn at the edges. I knew about the smaller payments. Not the big ones. But I knew she was taking money. I didn't touch it. I sent checks sometimes. She continued. $200 a month. For you. After your mother left. Her voice cracked. "I didn't think it would get this bad. Why didn't you stop her?" Fear crossed her face before she could hide it. "She would have cut me off. From you. From everyone." Silence stretched between us. "She's desperate now," Lillian added. "Ethan's debts are worse than she's admitting." I nodded once. "Then mediation's where this ends." She looked relieved. Then ashamed. "Be careful." I watched her leave, the envelope still untouched on the counter. The room was colder than I expected. Fluorescent lights, a long table polished to a dull shine. Noah set his folder down and gave me a small nod. Across from us, my mother adjusted her jacket like she was getting ready for a photo. The mediator opened with formalities, voice even, practiced. My mother leaned into them, hands folded, eyes damp at the corners. "I'm not here for money," she said softly. "I'm here for my mother's legacy." I kept my gaze on the table. The grain ran straight, uninterrupted. When it was my turn, Noah slid the laptop forward. "We have materials relevant to the claims," he said. "Discovered on the property." My mother stiffened. "This is harassment." The screen lit. My grandmother appeared, seated, steady, clear-eyed. Her voice filled the room. She spoke about dates, amounts, signatures. the way threats were delivered when doors were closed. The room went quiet enough to hear the air hum. "Turn that off," my mother snapped. "It's manipulated." The mediator raised a hand. "Mrs. Hale?" A pause. "These recordings, if authenticated, raise serious concerns, including mandatory reporting." My mother's face drained of color. She looked at me then. Really looked. "You wouldn't." I finally met her eyes. "I will, if this leaves this room." Silence settled. Heavy. Noah broke it. "My client is willing to resolve this today." I spoke without raising my voice. "You withdraw the petition. You sign a global release. You agree to permanent no contact. And you waive any present or future inheritance claims. Irrevocably." Her jaw tightened. "And the videos, they stay sealed," I said. "Unless you force my hand." The mediator leaned back, considering this would end the civil matter. My mother stared at the table, fingers trembling. Then she nodded once. The pen scratched loudly as she signed, each letter pressed hard. When it was done, she stood without looking at me. The door closed behind her, softer than I expected. I sat still, the room finally warming, breath returning in pieces. The house felt different after the mediation, not lighter, just quieter, like something had finally stopped knocking. I went back into the library that evening and sat at my grandmother's desk. The blue USB stayed in the drawer. I didn't need to open it again. I already knew what it held. The last file played in my head anyway. The part where I learned she'd paid $50,000 to keep me, to protect me. I sat with that longer than I expected. Let it settle where it needed to. A week later, a letter arrived from my mother. No return address. I read it once, then folded it and slid it into the same drawer as the drive. I didn't answer. I made one transfer after that, the same amount, $50,000. It went into a fund that supports children who've been left behind and need someone steady to stand in. The estate went into a restricted trust. No spectacle, no announcement, just structure. I took first principles off the shelf and set it on my own desk. It felt right there. Avery Langston learned that survival doesn't always look like winning. Sometimes it looks like choosing where the door stays closed and building something solid on the quiet side of it. If this stayed with you, pass it on. We notice who listens. We watched her leave the room the way she entered it without noise, without needing permission, and understood that some endings don't ask for applause. They ask for space.